Metro 2033, Dmitry Glukhovsky, Chapter 2, The Hunter. Once again, all sorts of nonsense started filling Artyom's head. The Dark Ones. He'd come across those damn non-humans only once during his watch, and he'd been scared silly. But how could he not have been? So, you're sitting there on watch. You're warming yourself by the fire. And suddenly you hear it. From the tunnel, from somewhere in the depths, a regular, dull knocking rings out. First in the distance, quietly, and then ever closer and ever louder. And suddenly your ears are struck by a horrible graveyard howl, and it's coming closer. And then complete mayhem. Everyone jumps up. They heap the sandbags and crates on which they'd been sitting into a barrier, quickly so that there'd be something to hide behind. And the most senior among them shouts with all his might at the top of his lungs, "Alert!" Reserves rush in from the station to give support. At the 300th meter where the main blow will have to be absorbed, they pull the cover from the machine gun, and people throw themselves to the ground, behind the sandbags, directing their guns at the mouth of the tunnel, taking aim. Finally, having waited for the Dark Ones to draw closer, they turn on the spotlight, and strange, delirious silhouettes become visible in its beam. They're naked, covered in black, glossy skin, with huge eyes and mouths like gashes. They're striding rhythmically ahead, towards the fortifications, towards death, with reckless abandon, without wavering, closer and closer. There are 3, 5, 8 beasts, and the first among them suddenly throws back its head and emits a howl like a requiem. You feel a shiver along your skin. You resist the urge to jump up and run, to toss your gun aside, to abandon your comrades, to throw everything to the devil and run. The spotlight is aimed straight into the muzzles of these nightmarish creatures to strike their pupils with its bright light. But it's obvious that they're not even squinting. They're not throwing up their hands. But they are looking into the spotlight with eyes wide open and continuing to move steadily onward. Do they even have pupils? And now, finally, the guys run up from the 300th meter with more machine guns. They lie down alongside, commands fly overhead. Everything's ready. The long-awaited fire thunders. At once, several guns begin to rattle, and the big machine gun rumbles. But the Dark Ones don't stop. They don't crouch. They stride ahead fully erect without slowing their pace, just as steadily and calmly as before. In the light of the spotlight, you can see how the bullets tear at their glossy bodies, how they're being pushed backwards, how they fall. But they get right back up again, rise to their full height, and march on. And again, hoarsely now, because its throat has already been pierced, a sinister howl, ringless and motionless. The guys will finish them off with shots to the head from 5 meters, just to be sure. And even when everything's over, when the corpses have been tossed into the shaft, that same sinister image will continue to hover before your eyes for a long time to come, bullets plunging into those black bodies, the spotlight scalding those wide-open eyes. But they kept on marching, as steadily as ever, onwards. Artyom convulsed at the thought. Yes, of course, it'd be better not to chat about them, he thought, just in case. "Hey, Andrei, get ready! We're on our way!" they shouted from the south, from the darkness. "Your shift's over!" The men at the fire began to move about, throwing off their stupor, rising to their feet, stretching, putting on their backpacks and weapons, and Andrei picked up the little puppy. Pyotr Andreevich and Artyom were returning to the station, while Andrei and his men were returning to the 300th meter since their shift there hadn't quite ended. Their replacements walked up and exchanged handshakes, ascertained whether or not anything strange or peculiar had happened, wished each other the relaxation they deserved, and sat down a bit closer to the fire, continuing a conversation they'd begun earlier. When everyone was already headed south along the tunnel towards the station, Pyotr Andreevich began speaking heatedly with Andrei about something, apparently returning to one of their eternal disputes. And the husky guy with the shaved head, who had questioned them concerning the Dark Ones' eating habits, fell away from them, drawing even with Artyom and beginning to walk in step with him. "So then, you know Sukhoi?" he asked Artyom in a low, muffled voice without looking him in the eye. "Uncle Sasha, well, yes, he's my stepfather. I live with him," answered Artyom honestly. "You don't say your stepfather? I've never heard of such, muttered the man. And what's your name? Artyom decided to ask, having reasoned that if someone questions you about your own relative, then that gives you the right to ask a question in return. My name? Asked the man, surprised. Why do you need to know? Well, I'll tell Uncle Sasha, Sukhoi, that you were asking after him. Tell him that Hunter was asking. Hunter, tell him I said hello. Hunter? That's an odd name. What is it, your last name, your nickname? Artyom asked. Last name? Not a last name, it's, how should I put it, a profession. And what's your name? Artyom. Fine then. Nice to meet you. I'm sure we'll see each other again. And fairly soon at that. Cheers. Giving Artyom a wink before parting, he remained behind at the 300th meter, along with Andrei. There wasn't much further to go. From a distance, the lively noise of the station could already be heard. Pyotr Andreevich, walking alongside Artyom, asked him worriedly, Listen, Artyom, who was that anyway? What was he saying to you back there? He was a strange sort of guy. He was asking about Uncle Sasha. An acquaintance of his, I guess. Do you know him? Don't seem to. He's just come to our station for a couple of days on some sort of business, it seems. Looks like Andrei has already met him. He was the one who insisted on being on the same watch with him. Who the hell knows why he found that so necessary? His face is somehow familiar. Yeah, it's probably hard to forget an appearance like that, said Artyom. Exactly. Where was it that I saw him? What's his name, do you know? Inquired Pyotr Andreevich. Hunter. That's what he said, Hunter. Just try and figure out what that's supposed to be. Hunter? Not a Russian name, frowned Pyotr Andreevich. In the distance, a red glow had already appeared. VDNKH, like the majority of stations, didn't have normal lighting, and for 30 years now, people had lived under scarlet emergency lights. Only occasionally were there normal electric light bulbs in their apartments, their tents and rooms. And only a few of the wealthiest metro stations and provincial types from distant, God-forsaken substations would nourish the dream for years on end of making it there and beholding this miracle. At the tunnel exit, they handed over their weapons to the other guards and signed their names in the ledger. Pyotr Andreevich shook Artyom's hand before parting and said, It's about time we hit the sack. I can barely stand on my feet, and you're probably ready to sleep standing up yourself. Give Sukhoi my warmest regards. He should pay me a visit. Artyom said goodbye and, feeling the sudden onset of fatigue, took himself off to his apartment. 200 people lived at VDNKH. Some in the service quarters, but the majority in tents on the platform. The tents were army issue, now old, tattered, but still intact. They didn't have to contend with wind or rain underground, and they were well maintained, so it was easily possible to live in them. They didn't lose heat or light, and they even kept out the noise. What more could one ask of one's housing? The tents were tucked up against the wall on either side, both along the tracks and in the central hall. The platform had been turned into something resembling a street. There was a fairly wide passage along its middle. Some of the tents were large, housing the more numerous families, and they occupied the space beneath the archways. But several arches remained free for passage, at each end of the hall and at its center. There were other accommodations below the platforms as well, but the ceiling there wasn't very high, and they weren't very suitable for habitation. They used them at VDNKH for the storage of provisions. The two northern tunnels were joined by a side tunnel, several tens of meters beyond the station, which once upon a time allowed trains to turn around and head back in the other direction. Now, one of these two tunnels was plugged up, the other led to the north, towards the botanical garden, and almost to Mitishi. They'd left it as a retreat route in the case of extreme circumstance, and it was there that Artyom had been on watch. The remaining segment of the second tunnel and the unified stretch between the two tunnels was designated for mushroom plantations. The rails there had been dismantled, and the ground had been tilled and fertilized. They hauled waste products there from the cesspit. Tidy rows of mushroom caps shone white along the tunnel. One of the two southern tunnels had been collapsed as well, at the 300th meter, and they used that area for chicken coops and pig pens. Artyom's home stood on the main thoroughfare. He lived there in one of the smaller tents together with his stepfather. His stepfather was an important man associated with the administration. He maintained contact with other stations, so the powers that be reserved the tent for him, It was granted to him as his own personal tent, and it was a first-rate one at that. His stepfather would frequently disappear for 2 or 3 weeks at a time, and never took Artyom with him, excusing himself by saying that he was occupied with matters too dangerous and didn't want to subject Artyom to any risk. He'd return from his trips thinner, his hair unkempt, sometimes wounded. But the first evening of his return, he would always sit with Artyom, telling him things that were hard to believe even for a resident of this grotesque little world, and one who was used to unbelievable stories. Artyom felt the urge to travel himself, but to wander around in the metro for no good reason was too dangerous. The patrol guards at independent stations were very suspicious and wouldn't let a person pass with a weapon, and heading off into the tunnels without a weapon meant certain death. And so, ever since he and his grandfather had come from Savyolovskaya, Artyom hadn't had the chance to take part in any decent excursions. He'd sometimes be sent to Alexeyevskaya on business, but he didn't go alone, of course. They went in group, sometimes as far as Rizhskaya. But on top of that, he had one more trip under his belt, about which he couldn't tell anyone, although he desperately wanted to. It happened a long, long time ago, when there wasn't even the slightest hint of the Dark Ones at the Botanical Garden, when it was simply an abandoned and dark station, and patrols from VDNKH were stationed much further to the north. At the time, Artyom himself was still just a kid. Back then, he and his buddies decided to take a risk. During a shift change, they stole past the outer cordon with flashlights and a double-barreled rifle stolen from someone's parents, and crawled for a long time around the Botanical Garden station. It was eerie, but it was interesting. In the light of the flashlights, you could see the remnants of human habitation everywhere. Ash, singed books, broken toys, torn clothing. Rats darted about, and from time to time strange rumbling sounds would ring out from the northern tunnel. One of Artyom's friends, he didn't even remember who it was anymore, but it was probably Zhenya, the most lively and most curious of the three, said, "What if we try to take down the barrier and go up to the surface?" Artyom had said right away that he was against it. The recent tales his stepfather told him about people who had spent time on the surface were fresh in his mind, about how afterwards they had long been sick, and about the sorts of horrors sometimes seen up there. But they immediately began to argue that this was a rare opportunity. When else would they manage to make it, with no adults, to an abandoned station, as they had now? And now they had the chance to go up to the surface too, and see with their own eyes what it's like to have nothing above your head. And resigning all hope of convincing him nicely, they declared that if he was such a coward, then he could sit down below and wait for them to come back. The thought of staying alone in an abandoned station, and on top of that, besmirching his reputation in the eyes of his two best friends, was completely unbearable to Artyom. So, summoning his courage, he consented. To everyone's surprise, the mechanism that brought the barrier dividing the platform from the escalator into motion actually worked. And it was Artyom himself who managed to start it up after half an hour of desperate attempts. The rusty iron wall moved aside with a nasty grating sound, and before their eyes stood the short row of steps of the escalator, leading upwards. Some of the steps had collapsed, and through the yawning gaps, in the light of the flashlights, one could see colossal gears that had stopped years ago, corroded with rust, grown over with something brownish that was moving, just barely noticeably. It wasn't easy for them to force themselves to go up there. Several times the steps they stepped on gave way with a screech and dropped below, and they climbed across the chasm, clinging to the old hulls of the metro lamps. The path to the surface wasn't long, but their initial determination was evaporating after that first collapsed step. And in order to raise their spirits, they imagined themselves to be real stalkers. Stalkers. The word, strange and false, was the name given to people whose poverty compelled them to make their way to abandoned military firing ranges, take apart unexploded missiles and bombs, and redeem brass casings with those who bought non-ferrous metals. It was also given to those strange people who, in times of peace, climbed around in the sewers. But all of these meanings had something in common. It was always an extremely dangerous profession, always a confrontation with the unknown, the mysterious, the ominous. Who knows what happened at those abandoned ranges, where the radioactive earth, disfigured by thousands of explosions, plowed with trenches and pitted with catacombs, put forth monstrous sprouts. And one could only guess what might dwell in the sewers of a teeming metropolis once the builders had closed the hatches behind them. Leaving those gloomy, narrow routes to venture to the surface were called stalkers. In protective suits and gas masks with tinted glass, they were heavily armed as they ascended to the surface in search of items that were necessities for everyone. Military supplies, equipment, replacement parts, fuel. There were hundreds of men who dared to do this. Those who were able to make it back alive could be counted on one's fingers, and these men were worth their weight in gold. They were valued even more highly than former Metro employees. All kinds of dangers awaited those who dared to go up above, from the radiation to the ghoulish creatures it had created. There was life there too on the surface, but it was no longer life according to the customary human conception of it. Every stalker became a living legend, a demigod, whom everyone, young and old, regarded with rapt amazement. In a world in which there was nowhere left to sail or fly, and the words pilot and sailor were becoming dull and losing their meaning, children dreamed of becoming stalkers. To strike out, clothed in shining armor, accompanied by hundreds of gazes of adoration and gratitude, climbing to the surface, to the realm of the gods, to do battle with monsters, and returning underground, to bring the people fuel, military supplies, light and fire, to bring life. Artyom, his friend Zhenya, and Vitalik the Splinter all wanted to become stalkers, and compelling themselves to climb upwards along the horrifying, screeching escalator with its collapsing steps, they imagined themselves in protective suits, with radiation damage monitors, with hulking machine guns at the ready, just as one would expect of real stalkers. But they had neither radiation monitors nor protection, and instead of imposing army-issue machine guns, they had only the ancient double-barreled rifle, which perhaps didn't even shoot at all. Before long, their ascent was complete, and they found themselves almost on the surface. Fortunately, it was night. Otherwise, they would have been blinded. Eyes accustomed to darkness and to the crimson light of bonfires and emergency lamps in their many years of life underground wouldn't have withstood the glare. Blinded and helpless, they would have been unlikely to make it back home again. The vestibule of the Botanical Garden station was almost destroyed. Half of the roof had collapsed, and through it one could see the radioactive dust of the dark blue summer sky, already cleansed of clouds and strewn with myriad stars. But what was a starry sky for a child who wasn't even capable of imagining that a ceiling might not be above his head? When you lift your gaze, and it doesn't run up against concrete coverings and rotten networks of wires and pipes, but is lost instead in a dark blue abyss, gaping suddenly above your head, imagine what infinity is, when most likely the very concept of infinity first appeared among humans inspired once upon a time by the nocturnal vault of the heavens. Millions of shining lights, silver nails driven into a dome of dark blue velvet. The boys stood for 3, 5, then 10 minutes, unable to utter a word. They wouldn't even have moved, and by morning would certainly have been cooked alive if they hadn't heard a blood-curdling howl ring out nearby. Coming to their senses, they rushed headlong back to the escalator and raced down it as fast as their legs could carry them, having thrown all caution to the wind and several times nearly plunging downwards into the teeth of the gears. Supporting each other and pulling each other out, they made the journey back in a matter of seconds. Spinning down the final 10 steps like a top, having lost the double-barreled rifle along the way, they immediately lunged for the control panel of the barrier. But damn it, the rusted old iron had become wedged, and it didn't want to return to its place. Scared half to death that the monsters would pursue them from the surface, they raced off homewards to the northern cordon. But remembering that they'd probably done something very bad, having left the hermetic gates open and had possibly left the path downward into the metro and to people open for the mutants, they found the time to agree to keep their lips sealed and not to tell any of the adults where they'd been. At the cordon, they said that they'd gone to a side tunnel to hunt for rats, but had lost their gun, become frightened, and returned. Artyom, of course, caught hell from his stepfather. His rear end smarted for a long time from that officer's belt, but Artyom held up like a captive partisan and didn't blurt out his military secret. And his comrades kept silent as well. Everyone believed them. But now, when he thought of their escapade, Artyom fell, more and more often, into reflection. Was this journey, and more importantly, the barrier they'd opened, connected somehow to the scum that had been assaulting their cordons for the last several years? Greeting passers-by, stopping now and then to hear some news, to shake hands with a friend, to land a kiss on the cheek of a familiar girl, to tell the older generations about his stepfather's dealings, Artyom finally reached his home. Nobody was there, and he decided not to wait for his stepfather, but to go to bed. An 8-hour watch was enough to take anyone off their feet. He threw off his boots, took off his jacket, and planted his face in the pillow. Sleep didn't make him wait. The flaps of the tent were lifted, and a massive figure slipped quietly inside, whose face couldn't be seen. The only thing visible was the ominous gleam of a smooth skull reflecting the red emergency lights. A muffled voice was heard. "We meet again. Your stepfather, I see, is not here. Doesn't matter. We'll find him, sooner or later. He won't get away. For now, you'll come with me. We have something to talk about. For example, the barrier at the botanical gardens." Artyom, frozen, recognized the guy slowly, silently, and his face was still not visible. For some reason, the light was falling in a strange way. Artyom wanted to call for help, but a powerful hand, as cold as death, clamped onto his mouth. At last, he managed to grab hold of a lantern, turn it on, and light up the person's face. What he saw rendered him powerless for a moment and filled him with horror. What loomed in front of him was not a human face, but a terrible black muzzle with two huge, vacant, and whiteless eyes and a gaping maw. Artyom darted and threw himself out of the tent. The light suddenly went out and the station became totally dark. There was only some weak, reflected light from a small fire somewhere in the distance. Without pausing for thought, Artyom rushed in that direction toward the light. The ghoul jumped towards him from behind, growling, "Stop! You have nowhere to run!" He roared with terrifying laughter, which slowly became a familiar graveyard howl. Artyom ran off without turning to look, hearing the footfalls of heavy boots behind him, unhurried even, as if his pursuer knew that there was nowhere to run, that Artyom would be caught sooner or later. Artyom ran up to the fire and saw a figure sitting there with its back to him. He was going to tap the sitting person on the shoulder and ask for help, but the person suddenly fell backwards, and it was clear that he had been dead a long time, and his face was covered with hoarfrost for some reason. And in the face of this frozen person, Artyom recognized Uncle Sasha, his stepfather. "Hey, Artyom, that was a good sleep. Now get up. You've been snoozing for 7 hours in a row already. Get up, sleepyhead. We have guests coming." Sukhoi's voice rang out. Artyom sat up in bed and stared at him, stunned. "Oh, Uncle Sash, is everything okay with you?" he asked at last, after a minute of blinking. It was hard for him to overcome the urge to ask him if he was alive or not, and that was only because the fact of it was standing in front of him. "Yes, as you can see. Come on, get up. No point lying about. I want to introduce you to my friend," said Sukhoi. There was a familiar but muffled voice nearby, and Artyom was covered in perspiration, remembering his recent nightmare. "So you've met already?" Sukhoi was surprised. "Well, Artyom, you're sharp." Finally, the visitor squeezed into the tent. Artyom shuddered and pressed against the tent wall. It was Hunter. The nightmare came alive again. Dark, vacant eyes, the roar of heavy boots behind him, the stiff corpse sitting at the fire. "Yes, we've met." Artyom managed to squeeze out his reply and reluctantly extended a hand to the visitor. Hunter's hand was hot and dry, and Artyom slowly started to convince himself that it was just a dream, that there was nothing sinister about this person, that it was just his imagination, ignited with fear after 8 hours at the cordon, playing out in his dreams. "Listen, Artyom, do us a favor. Boil some water for tea. Have you tried our tea?" Sukhoi winked at the visitor. "A poisonous potion." "I know it," Hunter responded, nodding. "Good tea. They make it at Pechatniki, too. Pig swill. But here, it's a different matter." Artyom went to get the water, then to the communal fire to boil the kettle. It was strictly forbidden to make fires inside tents. A couple of stations had burnt down due to tent fires before now. On the way, he thought about Pechatniki. It was at the other end of the metro system, and who knows how long it would take to get there. How many transfers, crossings, through how many stations you'd have to go. Lying sometimes, fighting sometimes, other times getting through thanks to connections. And this guy says casually, they make it at Pochatniki too. Yes, he's an interesting character, even if a little scary. His grip squeezes like a vice, and Artyom wasn't a weakling. He was always eager to compare strength with a good handshake. Having boiled the kettle, he returned to the tent. Hunter had already thrown off his raincoat, under which you could see a black polo neck jumper, tightly filled with a powerful neck and a bulging, strong body, and military trousers drawn tight with an officer's belt. On top of the polo neck, he was wearing a vest with lots of pockets, and a holster hung under his arm containing a burnished pistol of monstrous size. Upon closer inspection, Artyom could see that it was a Stechkin with a long silencer, and it had something attached to it, which by the looks of it was a laser sight. A monster like that would cost you all you had. The weapon, Artyom noted immediately, was not a simple one. Not for self-defense, that was for sure. And then he remembered that when Hunter introduced himself, he added, as in someone who hunts. So Artyom, pour the visitor some tea. Yes, and you, Hunter, take a seat. Tell us how you are. Sukhoi was excited. Devil knows how long it's been since I last saw you. I'll tell you about myself later. There's not much to say. But strange things are going on with you, I hear. Goblins are crawling around, coming from the north. Today I was listening to fairy stories while standing with the patrol. What's up? Hunter spoke in brief, choppy phrases. It's death, Hunter. Sukhoi's mood suddenly darkened. It's our death stealing up from the future. Our fate is creeping in. That's what it is. Why death? I heard that you crushed them very successfully, that they're disarmed. Well, where are they from and who are they? I've never heard anything like this at any of the other stations. Never. And that means that it isn't happening anywhere else. I want to know what's up. I'm sensing a great danger. I want to know the level of danger. I want to understand its nature. That's why I'm here. Danger should be liquidated, right, Hunter? You're still a cowboy, Hunter. But can danger be liquidated? That's the question. Sukhoi grinned sadly. That's the hitch. Everything here is more complicated than it seems to you. A lot more complicated. This is not just zombies and corpses walking across cinema screens. That's too simple. You load a revolver with silver bullets. Sukhoi demonstrated by putting his palms together and pretending to point a pistol as he continued. Pow! Pow! And the forces of evil are slain. But this is something different. Something frightening. And as you well know, it's hard to scare me. You're panicking? Hunter asked, surprised. Their main weapon is horror. The people are barely maintaining their positions. People are sleeping with machine guns, with Uzis, and they're coming at us unarmed. And everybody knows that there's a higher quality and quantity of them still to come. They are almost running away, going crazy from the horror of it. Some have already gone crazy between you and me. And this isn't just fear, Hunter. Sukhoi lowered his voice. I don't even know how to explain it to you plainly. It gets stronger every time. They are getting into our heads somehow. And it seems to me that they are doing it on purpose. You can sense them from afar, and the feeling gets stronger and stronger, and the agitation is so vile that your knees start to shake. And you can't hear anything yet, and you can't see anything, but you already know that they're coming nearer. Nearer. And then there's a howl, and you just want to run. But they're coming closer, and you're starting to shake. And a while later you can see them walking with open eyes into the searchlights. Artyom shuddered. It seemed that he wasn't the only one tormented by nightmares. He used to try not to talk about it to anyone before. He was afraid that they would take him for a coward or for a lunatic. They're crippling our minds, the reptiles, Sukhoi continued. And you know, it's like they adjust themselves to your wavelength. And the next time they come, you feel them even more strongly, and you're even more afraid. And this isn't just fear, I can tell you. He went silent. Hunter was sitting there without moving, studying him, and apparently thinking over what he'd heard. Then he took a mouthful of hot brew and spoke, slowly and quietly. This is a threat to everybody, Sukhoi. To the whole filthy metro, not just to your station. Sukhoi was silent, as though he didn't want to reply, but suddenly he burst out, The whole metro, you think? No, not just progress already. It's time to pay. It's a battle of species, Hunter, a battle of species. And these dark ones are not evil spirits, and they aren't some kind of ghoul. This is Homo novus, the next stage in evolution, better adapted to the environment than us. The future is behind them, Hunter. Maybe Homo sapiens will rot for another couple of decades, or for another 50 in these demonic holes that we've dug for ourselves, back when there was plenty and not everyone could fit above ground, so the poorer folk were driven underground in the daytime. We will become as pale and sick as Wells Morlocks. Remember them? From the time machine where beasts of the future lived underground? They too were once Homo sapiens. Yes, we are optimistic. We don't want to die. We will cultivate mushrooms with our own dung, and the pig will become man's best friend, as they say, and our partner in survival. And we will guzzle multivitamins with an appetizing crunch that were prepared by our careful ancestors in the tongue, a few more rags, and if you're really lucky, a handful of cartridges, only to quickly run back down into the stuffy vaults, looking shiftily around like thieves to see if anyone noticed. Because we aren't at home there on the surface anymore. The world doesn't belong to us anymore, Hunter. The world doesn't belong to us anymore. Sukhoi fell silent, looking at the steam slowly rising from his cup of tea and condensing, and that he had never heard anything like it from his stepfather. There was nothing left of his former confidence in the fact that everything would necessarily be fine. Nothing left of his, "Don't panic, we'll get through it," and nothing left of his encouraging winks. Or was that just all for show? You don't have anything to say, Hunter? Nothing? Go on, contradict me. Where are your arguments? Where is that optimism of yours? Last time when I spoke to you, you were certain that the levels of radiation would lower, and people could return to the surface again. Hey, Hunter. The sun will rise over the woods, but just not for me, Sukhoi sang in a teasing voice. We'll seize life with our teeth. We will hold on to it with all our strength. But what would the philosophers have said and the sectarians confirmed if there was suddenly nothing to grab? You don't want to believe it, can't believe it, but somewhere in the depths of your soul you know that that's how it is. But we like this whole business, Hunter, don't we? Me and you, we really love living. We will crawl through the stinking underground, sleep in an embrace with pigs, eat rats, but we will survive, right? Wake up, Hunter. No one will write a book about you called The Story of a Real Person. No one will sing about your will to live, your hypertrophic instinct for self-preservation. How long will you last on mushrooms, multivitamins, and pork? Surrender, Homo sapiens. You are no longer the king of nature. You've been dethroned. No, you don't have to die instantly. Nobody will insist on that. Crawl on a little more in agony, choking on your own excrement. But know this, Homo sapiens, you are obsolete. Evolution, the laws of which you understood, has already created its new branch, and you are no longer the latest stage, the crown of creation. You are a dinosaur. Now you must step aside for a new, more perfect species. No need to be egotistical. Game over, it's time you let others play. Your time is up. You're extinct. And let future generations rack their brains over the question of what made Homo sapiens extinct. Though I doubt anyone will be interested. Hunter, who was studying his fingernails through this monologue, raised his eyes to Sukhoi and said gravely, "You have really given up on everything since I last saw you. I remember that you were telling me that if we preserve culture, if we don't turn sour, if we don't stop using proper Russian, if our children learn to read and write, then we'll be fine, and we'll last here underground. Didn't you say all that? Or wasn't it you? And now look at you, surrender, Homo sapiens. What the hell is that? Yeah, well, I just figured out a thing or two, Hunter. I have felt something which you have yet to get, and maybe you'll never get it. We are dinosaurs, and we are living the last days of our life. It might take 10 or even 100 years, but all the same. Resistance is futile, right? Hunter offered in a mean voice. What are you driving at? Sukhoi was silent, his eyes downcast. Clearly this had cost him a lot, having never admitted his weaknesses to anybody, or said such a thing to an old friend. Even worse that it was in front of Artyom. It was painful to him to hold up a white flag. But no, you won't wait, Hunter slowly said, standing up to full height. And they won't wait. New species, you say? Evolution? Inevitable extinction? Dung? Pigs? Vitamins? I'm not there yet. I'm not afraid of it either. Got it? I am not putting my hand up to volunteer. The instinct of self-preservation? You call it that. Yes, I will sink my teeth into life. Fuck your evolution. Let other species wait their turn. I'm not a lamb being led to slaughter. Capitulate and go off with your more perfect and more adapted beings. Give them your place in history. If you feel that you've fought all you can fight, then go ahead and desert. I won't judge you. But don't try to scare me. And don't try to drag me along with you into the slaughterhouse. Why are you giving me a sermon? If you don't do it alone, if you need to do it collectively, you won't be so ashamed. Or has the enemy promised you a bowl of hot porridge for each person that you bring to them in captivity? My fight is hopeless? You say that we're at the edge of the abyss? I spit on your abyss. If you think that your place is at the bottom of the abyss, then take a deep breath and forward march. But I'm not coming for the ride. If rational man, refined and civilized Homo sapiens, chooses to capitulate, then I refuse to be called one and would rather become a beast. And I will, like a beast, sink my teeth into life and gnaw on the throats of others in order to survive. And I will survive. Got it? I will survive. He sat down and quietly asked Artyom for another splash of tea. Sukhoi stood up himself and went to fill and heat the kettle, gloomily and silently. Artyom stayed in the tent alone with Hunter. His last words were ringing with contempt. His malicious confidence that he would survive lit a fire in Artyom. For a long time he was trying to decide whether to say something, and then Hunter turned to him and said, "And what do you think, my friend? Tell me, don't be shy. You want to turn into vegetation too, like a dinosaur? To sit on your things and wait until someone comes for you? Do you know the parable about the frog and the cream? 2 frogs landed in a pail of cream. One, thinking rationally, understood straight away that there was no point in resistance and that you can't deceive destiny. But then what if there's an afterlife? Why bother jumping around, entertaining false hopes in vain?" He crossed his legs and sank to the bottom. The second, the fool, was probably an atheist, and she started to flop around. It would seem that she had no reason to flail about if everything was predestined, but she flopped around and flopped around anyway. Meanwhile, the cream turned to butter, and she crawled out. We honor the memory of this second frog's friend, eternally damned for the sake of progress and rational thought. "Who are you?" Artyom ventured at last. "Who am I? You already know who I am, the one who hunts." "But what does that mean, the one who hunts? What do you do?" "Hunt." "How can I explain it to you? You know how the human body is built? It's made up of millions of tiny cells. Some emit electrical signals, others store information, others still soak up nutrients, transfer oxygen. But all of them, even the most important among them, would be dead in less than a day, and the whole organism would die if it wasn't for cells responsible for immunity. They're called macrophages. They work methodically and regularly like a clock, a metronome. When an infection gets into an organism, they find it, track it down, wherever it's hiding, and sooner or later they get to it and... He made a gesture as though he was wringing someone's neck and let out an unpleasant crunching sound. Liquidate it. "But what relevance does that have to your job?" Artyom insisted. "Imagine that the whole metro was a human organism, a complex organism made up of about 40,000 cells. I am the macrophage, the hunter. This is my job. Any danger that is sufficiently serious as to threaten the whole organism must be liquidated. That's what I do." Sukhoi finally came back with the kettle and poured the boiling brew into the mugs. He had obviously gathered his thoughts in the meantime, and he said to Hunter, "So you're going to take on the liquidation of the source of danger, cowboy? You're going to go hunting and shoot down all the dark ones? It's hardly possible that anything will come of it. There's nothing to be done, Hunter. Nothing. There is always one last option. The last resort. To blow your northern tunnel to pieces, collapse it completely, to cut off that new species of yours. Let them procreate from above and leave us moles alone. The underground is now our natural habitat. I'll tell you something interesting. Only a few people know about this at the station. They've already blown up one tunnel. But above us, above the northern tunnel, there is a stream of groundwater. And when they blew up the second northern tunnel, we were almost flooded. If the explosion had been just a bit stronger, goodbye, my dear VDNK. So, if we now blow up the remaining northern tunnel, then we'll be flooded. We'll be covered in radioactive swill. Then that will be the end, not only for us. Therein lies the real danger to the metro. If you start an interspecies battle now and in this way, then our species will lose. As they say in chess, check. What about the hermetic gate? Surely we can simply close the hermetic gate in that tunnel, Hunter said. The hermetic gate was already dismantled along with the rest of the line's gates 15 years ago by some smart guys, and they sent the material to fortify. There you go, check again. Tell me, have they increased their pressure recently? Hunter, it seems, was conceding and shifting the conversation to another tack. Increasing? And how? It's hard to believe that it was only a little while ago that we didn't know they existed. And now, here they are. A major threat. And believe me, the day is near when they will sweep us away, with all of our fortifications, searchlights, and machine guns. It's impossible to raise the whole metro to defend one good-for-nothing station. Yes, we make pretty good tea, but it's unlikely that anyone will risk their life even for such excellent tea as ours. In the end, there's always competition with Pochatniki. Check again. Sukhoi grinned sadly. No one needs us. We ourselves will soon not be in any condition to handle the onslaught. We can't blow up the tunnel and cut them off. We also don't have the means to go to the surface and burn them down for obvious reasons. Checkmate. Checkmate to you, Hunter. And checkmate to me. Checkmate to all of us in the near future, if you see what I mean. Sukhoi grinned sourly. We'll see, Hunter snapped back. We'll see. They sat there a little longer, discussing all kinds of things. Many of the names mentioned weren't familiar to Artyom. There were references to bits and pieces of stories. Every once in a while, an old argument would spark up, of which Artyom understood little, but their discussions had clearly been going on for years, abating if the men hadn't seen each other in a while and flaring up again when they met. Finally, Hunter stood up and said it was time he went to bed because he, unlike Artyom, hadn't slept since his patrol. He said goodbye to Sukhoi. But before leaving, he suddenly turned to Artyom and whispered to him, "Come out for a minute." Artyom jumped up straight away and followed him, not paying attention to the surprised look on his stepfather's face. Hunter waited for him outside, silently buttoning up his raincoat and lifting the latch on the gate. "Shall we go through?" he suggested, and he quickly stepped forward onto the platform towards the guest tent where he was staying. Artyom hesitantly moved to follow him, trying to guess what this man wanted to discuss with him, a mere boy, really, who had done nothing significant or even useful for anyone so far. "What do you think about the job that I do?" Hunter asked. "It's cool. I mean, if it wasn't for you, well, and the others like you, if there are such people, then we would have long ago." Artyom mumbled uncomfortably. His tongue was twisted and he felt hot suddenly. As soon as someone like Hunter paid him attention and wanted to tell him something, even just asking him to come outside for a minute, to be alone, without his stepfather, he blushed like a virgin and started agonizing, bleeding like a lamb. "You think highly of it?" "Well then, if people think highly of it," Hunter grinned, "that means there's no point in listening to the defeatists among us. Your stepfather is being a coward, that's all. But he's really a brave man. In any case, he was once. Something horrific is happening here, Artyom. Something that can't be allowed to continue. Your stepfather's right. These aren't just the goblins we've seen at dozens of other stations. These aren't vandals. They're not just degenerates. This is something new, something meaner. There's a chill in the air. There's death in the air. I've only been here 2 days, and I am already being penetrated by the fear here. And the more you know about them, the more you study them, the more you see them, the stronger the fear, as far as I understand. You, for example, have you seen them often?" "Only once so far. I've only just started on the northern patrol, though," Artyom confessed. "But if I'm honest, once was enough. I've been tortured by nightmares ever since. Like today, for example. And it was a while ago that I saw them. Nightmares, you say? You too?" Hunter frowned. "Yes, it doesn't look like a coincidence. And if I live here a bit longer, another couple of months, and go on patrols regularly, then it's not out of the question that I'll turn sour too. No, my lad, your stepfather is mistaken. It isn't him speaking. It's not his thinking. It's them thinking for him, and it's them speaking for him. Give up, they say. Resistance is futile, and he's their mouthpiece. And he probably doesn't even know it himself. And it's right, I guess, that they tune in and impress themselves on the psyche. Fiends! Tell me, Artyom." Hunter turned to him straight on, and the boy understood. He was about to tell him something really important. "Do you have a secret? Something that you wouldn't tell anyone on the station, but that you could tell a passerby, perhaps?" "Well..." Artyom hesitated, and for a perceptive person that would have been enough in order to understand that such a secret existed. And I have a secret too. Why don't we swap? I need to share this secret with someone, but I want to be sure that they won't blab. That's why you give me yours. And don't let it be any crap about a girl, but something serious, something that no one else should ever hear. And I'll tell you something. This is important to me. Very important. You understand? Artyom wavered. Curiosity, of course, had got him, but he was frightened of telling his secret to a man who was not only interesting to talk to and who had seen many adventures, but, by the looks of things, was also a cold-blooded murderer who wouldn't hesitate in the slightest to remove any obstacle in his path. And what if Artyom happened to have been an accessory to the incursion of the Dark Ones? Hunter looked into his eyes reassuringly. You have nothing to be afraid of in me. I guarantee inviolability. And he winked fraternally. They had walked up to the guest tent that had been given to Hunter for the night, but they remained outside. Artyom thought again for the last time and decided what to do. He took in some more air and then hurriedly, in one breath, laid out the whole story of the expedition to the botanical gardens. When he was finished, Hunter was silent for a time, digesting what he'd heard. Then, in a hoarse voice, he said, Well, generally speaking, you and your friends should be killed for doing that, from a disciplinary point of view. However, I already guaranteed you inviolability. But that doesn't extend to your friends. Artyom's heart jumped. He felt his body freeze in fear and his legs falter. He wasn't able to speak, and so he waited in silence for the verdict. But in light of your age and the general brainlessness of that event, and also the fact that it happened a while ago, you are pardoned. Go on. And so that Artyom could be brought out of his prostration sooner, Hunter winked again at him, this time even more reassuringly. But know that you'd be shown no mercy by your fellow inhabitants at this station. So you have voluntarily given over to me a powerful weapon against you yourself. And now listen to my secret. And while Artyom was regretting his big mouth, Hunter continued, I haven't come across the whole metro system to this station for no reason. I'm not giving up on my own task. Danger should be eliminated, as you have probably heard many times today. Should and will be eliminated. I do that. Your stepfather is afraid of it. He is slowly turning into their instrument as far as I can see. He is resisting them more and more reluctantly, and he's trying to get me to join him. If the groundwater thing is true, then the option of exploding the tunnel is, of course, obsolete. But your story has clarified something for me. If the Dark Ones first made their way here after your expedition, then they're coming from the botanical gardens. Something has been growing there that isn't right in that botanical garden if that's where they were born. And that means that you can block them there, closer to the surface, without the threat of unleashing the groundwaters. But the devil knows what's happening at the 700th meter of the northern tunnel. That's where your powers end. That's where the powers of darkness begin. The most widespread form of government in the whole Moscow metro system. I'm going there. No one should know this. Tell Sukhoi that I asked you lots of questions about conditions at the station, and that will be the truth. You don't have to explain anything, right? If everything goes smoothly, I'll explain everything to whoever needs to know. But it might be that... He stopped short for a second and looked at Artyom more closely. That I don't come back. Whether there's an explosion or not, if I don't come back before the following morning, someone should say what's happened to me and tell my colleagues about the fiends that are making trouble in your northern tunnels. I have seen all my former acquaintances here at this station today, including your stepfather. And I feel, I almost see, that there's a little worm of doubt and horror crawling through the brains of everyone who has been exposed to their influence. I can't rely on people with worm-eaten brains. I need a healthy person whose ability to reason has not yet been stormed by these ghouls. I need you. Me? But how can I help you? Artyom was surprised. Listen to me. If I don't come back, then you have to, at any cost you hear, you have to go to Polis, to Gorod, and look there for a man with the nickname Melnik. Tell him the whole story. And one other thing. I will give you something, which you will give to him as proof that I sent you. Come inside for a minute. Hunter took the lock off the entrance, lifted the flap of the tent, and ushered Artyom inside. There wasn't much room in the tent due to the huge camouflage rucksack and the impressively large trunk which were standing on the floor. By the light of the lantern, Artyom saw a dark, shimmering gun barrel in the depths of the bag, which, by the looks of it, was a reassembled army hand machine gun. Before Hunter could manage to close the bag so he wouldn't see, Artyom caught a glimpse of a matte black metal box containing machine gun magazines laid in a dense row next to the weapon, and small green anti-personnel grenades on the other side of it. Without any commentary on this arsenal, Hunter opened the side pocket of his rucksack and withdrew a small metal capsule from it made of a machine gun cartridge case. The side where there should have been a bullet was screwed up into a little twist. "Here, take this. Don't wait for me if I've been gone 2 days. And don't be afraid. You will meet people everywhere who will help you. You have to do this. You know that everything depends on you. I don't have to explain that to you, right? That's it. Wish me success and get out of here. I need to catch up on some sleep." Artyom managed to utter a word of goodbye, shook Hunter's hand, and started wandering over to his tent, stooping under the weight of the mission on his shoulders.